feature because you can tell whether you're centered or whatever and all that. And I can tell that the screen is off to the side because all your heads just went that way.
Yeah. It's all, the problem is you can only see half of the room right now.
I understand. I do understand. Well, so what we can do is about midway through, you just switch it around the other way and I'll get to see the other half.
Okay, we'll try and change the position of the computer and see if it...
There I am.
See yourself right now? Do you like what you look like?
Oh, hello. Somebody's waving at me in the back. Hi.
Okay, Susan, I'm going to say a few words in Hebrew and then we'll... then we can start.
I trust that it's nothing nasty about my hair
Nothing
standing.
nasty about you.
בעמותות, ב-NGO, תקנת.
צופים, ברוכים הבאים. שמחה מאוד על זה שבחרתם להיות איתנו היום. הסשן הזה שהולך להיות בשעה וחצי הקרובות בעצם הולך לעסוק בנושא של דמות מנהל ההתנדבות במאה ה-21. מי שקיבל את ההזמנה בגלל יודע שבמקור היה אמור להעביר את הסדנה מרטין ג'יי קאולינג, שבגלל נסיבות משפחתיות מצערות לא יכל להיות איתנו היום, וסוזן אליס, שתכף אני אציג אותה באנגלית לכבודה, נאותה בדקה ה-90 בערך להירתם ולבוא. I'm just telling them, Susan, that it's 5:30 in the morning where you are right now, so they should know that not only you made an effort to join us at the last minute, but also you agreed to wake up at 4:45 for us.
It's a real mitzvah I'm doing here.
Real mitzvah, we agree. הסדנה הזאת תתקיים בשפה האנגלית, כלומר סוזן תדבר באנגלית. אם אתם רוצים לשאול שאלות או להגיב ונוח לכם יותר לדבר בעברית, אין שום בעיה שתדברו בעברית ואני אתרגם לה, שבאמת תרגישו בנוח. מדובר בסוג של שיחה, יש פה מיקרופון שהכבל שלו מספיק ארוך בשביל להעביר ביניכם, במידה ומישהו רוצה להגיד משהו. אנחנו בעצם נשמע מסוזן את הדברים שלה ואז נפתח את זה ככה לשיחה, שבסוף אני גם אשמח, יש לכם פה דפים שסוזן שלחה, שחלקם גם תורגמו לעברית, שתוכלו לקחת איתכם בסוף הסדנה. Just telling them about the handouts that you've prepared, okay? And I think we can begin. I just offered them that if they would like to ask you questions in Hebrew, we will translate.
Right.
Susan, would you like to know who the people in the room are? Is it important?
Sure. I mean, we don't really have time to go around and do a real introduction, but if you want to tell me something about who's in the room, that'd be great.
Okay, we have a very diverse room, I think. We have people that represent the Ministry of Education. We have people from municipalities. Who, for instance, we have Doron who runs the Department of Volunteering in one of the municipalities in Israel, in Ra'anana. We have a lot of people from different volunteer organizations. From Elem, from Yad Sarah, from Enosh, from Witzo, Adassa Israel, Jewish Agency, from the Joint, of course, JDC, and the Education Department in Ra'anana. So it's a very diverse room.
Great.
So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting for all of us. Just to ask you guys if if you need us to slow down, if something isn't clear in the English, make a sign and we'll try to slow down or translate. Okay? Okay, Susan, so I'm giving you the stage.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good. Well, for me, it's good morning, good afternoon, everyone at your time. And let's start by saying a happy International Volunteer Day. We're proving the internationality, if you will, of this field right now. Skype is an incredible medium. I mean, voice over internet protocol is the medium that's incredible. But not only is this quite amazing that I can be 5,000 miles away having this presentation, that I can see you, that we can hear each other, but the fact that the technology is free is sort of beyond belief when you think about it. And I might add that because we're talking about this session, it relates to the fact that what's needed of volunteer management or a person who's leading volunteers right now at this point in time, making use of tools like this actually is something that's needed from us. Anybody who's been in the field long, and I'm about to ask you some questions about yourselves, anybody who's been in the field for a while can remember that even 10 years ago, the big factor that people claimed was holding them back was they couldn't get a budget from their department, they couldn't get tools. In fact, 20 years ago, the big discussion was they won't give me a computer for my office. And today that seems so insane because we all work that way, but these tools are pretty amazing. I want to begin by saying I haven't spoken to Martin, and I don't know why he had to pull out at the last second. I do know that he wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been something serious. I do know that his sister has been quite ill in Australia, and I'm afraid it might be something related to that. But I'm always glad to help out, and as some of you know, I did spend some time in Israel with Yad Sarah, and I have a little bit of a feel for the volunteer community in Israel, but not a lot. Which brings me to the first thing I want to say. I say it any time I'm addressing an audience that's not from the United States, or when I'm not in the United States, but in this case, I'm in the United States, but you're not, so here we are. And that is that I very much know that I'm an American. And I say that in the start because I try hard in any presentation to speak about the things that I truly believe work in many cultures and in many places around the world, kind of that core of common values and practices that work well for us. But I also recognize that you are the experts in your culture. You know what's going on in Israel. Further, that you know what's going on in your own organization or type of service that you deliver. And so I really do feel a degree of obligation and responsibility to say that I don't necessarily know what's culturally determined or not. I can't always tell that. It's a matter of nuance. So I ask you to listen to any ideas that I talk about with the idea that I'm giving them to you as suggestions, not as do this, but also if you reject them because you don't like the idea, not because it was told to you by an American. So there you go, is my basic on that. One of the things that I inherited by picking this up at the last second was the topic. And I really have no idea how Martin would have handled it, and it really doesn't matter because at this point we're together now. But the topic, as it was told to me, related to what is volunteer management in a changing world is the theme of your, in general. And the idea of the profile of volunteer management in the 21st century. Ironically, we're getting just that almost at 2013, no, I don't want to lose a year, 2012. And it's we can't just talk about the new 21st century. We're already in its second decade. And having said that, when Leora talked to me about this, I made a comment that I'll begin with, which is, I really believe there's some things about working with volunteers that are timeless and that do not change, the core things. Meaning, it will never change that the most successful volunteer management relates to defining work carefully and well, telling people up front what it is you really need to have done, engaging them in thinking about how they could best do it, and then supporting them while they do it. That's never going to change. That's core volunteer leadership, volunteer management. On the other hand, everything in the world is changing around us. And a perfect example is what we're doing right here, right now. In some ways, there's this breakout session, as we call it, in a conference, sitting around a table, having a speaker, talking, interacting. That hasn't changed in 100 years. That's what people do. What's new in this, what we're doing, is using the technology to connect us across many, many miles. So it's that balance between what is the core of keeping something versus what is brand new that we have to adapt to. And the other thing about adapting is sometimes what you're trying to do is prevent something. We might be in prevention mode. Other times what we're doing is welcoming, wanting to make it go faster. So one of the things that I have on my list in terms of what's needed from us right now in time is that we need to be futurists. We need to figure out what is going on around us and how do we tap into it. I do have a couple questions of you before I continue on this, and I do hope we can make this interactive, because this isn't a speech that I'm trying to give, because I absolutely promise you I have not spent my weekend writing a speech for this, and I only found out on Friday morning that I was doing it. I would like to know how long you've been in the field. How many of you, and Leora, you'll have to help me because they're going to do it by a show of hands and I don't see everybody. How many of you consider yourself very new to volunteer management? And I don't care how many weeks, months, or whatever you do in that, but how many of you feel this is the first time you've been in volunteer leadership and you're still a newbie, new person? About how many of raising their hand, Leora? About a third or more or less?
7 or 8 out of about 20.
Okay, so it's about a third. Okay. Yeah. How many of you would say that you're no longer brand new, but you're still very much on the learning curve? You're comfortable with the basics, but you are still intermediate, let's say. And how many? And how's that? Another 5 or 6?
Another third, yeah.
Okay. And how many of you feel quite experienced? That doesn't mean you know it all, but you feel experienced. You've been in the field a while, you feel you're experienced. How many of you feel you're corroding and about ready to drop into the grave in this field?
Thank God, none.
Right. None, okay. I'm sorry. I have to say that one of the problems of doing this at 5:30 in the morning in my time is that I have morning allergies, so that's why I've got a tissue in my head. I'm not allergic to you guys. I'm just, whatever. Okay. Yeah. The reason that I ask that question is that I think sometimes people believe that if you've been around for a long time in a field, you are set in your... Are you moving the microphone or something?
Yes.
How do you see everything?
No, she hears
I'm hearing... That's better, because I'm hearing real crackling. Oh, that's what she's doing.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's right, because that was silent to you, but in my ears I was hearing.
We apologize.
No, that's okay. I mean, you're trying to do it to make it better so people can talk with me. What I was saying was that sometimes we think that people who are in the field a long time are going to be entrenched in what they're doing and they don't want to change. And of course that can happen. But ironically, sometimes it's the newest people who have just learned what it takes to be successful with volunteers who also go kind of say resist all of a sudden changing, doing something a different way because they've just learned it and they want to learn it. See, that question wasn't where are you on gradation of comfort with change, if you know what I mean. What I'd like you to do is if you would pull out the handout that says are volunteers essential? Are you essential? I want to tell you what I'd like to begin talking about. It's a fact, and it's interesting because A.L. Kaplan told me that you just had a speaker from the media who talked with you about how you're presenting volunteering to the media and getting whatever. And I said to her, it's interesting because I'm going to be doing something about that in some ways here. I do believe that one of the things that's needed from a person in charge of volunteers in an organization in this time and in the future is we have got to be effective communicators. We also have to be in-house educators. It is absolutely crazy to assume that the people around us understand automatically what it takes to do effective volunteer management and what volunteers need. In fact, I have one more question of you. How many of you, before you left school, before you finished university, how many of you ever had a course in working with volunteers? Anyone in the room?
No one.
No one. How many of you had 1 hour in the classroom about working with volunteers? 1 hour. No one.
No.
Right? Yes?
No one.
No one. Understand the implications of that for what I'm talking about. If we, and I didn't either, okay, when we in this room or in my office, home office, and in your room, never had any formal training in our professional education about this before we got on the job. What you're doing now is once you're on the job. It's later. It's after the fact learning or refreshing learning, not new. If we didn't know this, how can we assume the people around us know anything? Think about that. Sometimes I always say that particularly our executives, it's not that they're malicious, it's that they're ignorant. Right? It's ignorance, not malice. And I'm saying this because another piece of this is volunteers are as ignorant about volunteering as our colleagues are. They're doing it, but they're not necessarily thinking about it, nor have they learned about it. So when I say in-house educator, instead of thinking I'm being mistreated or that this person's making bad decisions about volunteers or whatever, stop for a moment and say, do they actually realize it's a bad decision? And this is an important point, being aware of teachable moments. Now, if we were having a whole day together on this subject, I would begin with the first part of this handout on why does your organization involve volunteers in the first place? Because I think in many ways we could spend 2 hours just on that subject because people don't understand it. If you ask the average person, why are volunteers involved in our organization? Whether you ask a volunteer or you ask a staff member or you ask somebody out on the street who just walks past your building and sees it, the vast majority of people would say, well, because there's not enough money. That makes volunteers a second choice. It means if we had money, we wouldn't need volunteers. Now, as I said, I don't want to open that can of worms because I don't really have time to deal with it here, though I have lots of things in writing about it. If you're interested in think about it. But the point being that we tend to talk about volunteer. We start right away as if people understand why we have volunteers. And we have volunteers. Yes, volunteers let us stretch our budget. They don't save money, but they let us stretch our budget, let us do more and all of that. But is that necessarily what's important? That also makes volunteers important because we're comparing them to paid staff. Well, we would have had to have 500 paid staff, but instead we have 30 paid staff and 1,000 volunteers or whatever it is. That's still a comparison to paid staff. The question is, why do we have volunteers? What unique roles do they fill? And that relates to things like credibility with the public and funders because they're not getting any money from the organization. It relates to clients knowing that what they've got is somebody who really wants to be there, not necessarily somebody who treats them like a job. And that doesn't mean that paid people treat clients like a job, but it's all of that conceptual thing. The other thing is, and notice that this handout, which I'm using I keep updating it, but I use it a lot, it says, are volunteers essential? Not just nice. One of the biggest problems we have in our field is that volunteering is always spoken of as nice or good or holy or inspiring or whatever it is. Well, the truth of the matter is that volunteers are not only, in the United States, we refer to that as motherhood and apple pie. Have you ever heard that expression? Motherhood and apple pie. That's quintessentially the American spirit. Wonderful, motherhood and apple pie. The problem is volunteering is also revolution. Volunteering is also people not liking something and working to change it. And what the media, what politics, everybody wants nice, supportive volunteers. But the only thing that changes things are activists. We used to have some politicians, this was like 15 years ago in the United States, who used to talk about volunteers as the quiet heroes. Doesn't that make your heart beat faster? Quiet heroes. And I used to say, sorry, only the loud heroes actually get something done. So I say this because it begins, what our role is, begins with our perception of what the role of volunteers is in our organization. Who are we leading? Are we leading helpers? Are we leading cheap helpers? Or are we in a position of enabling community activists to come in and do something. You can see where that's a very different thing. And you know what? Most of our organizations hire us to bring in cheap helpers. But if our vision is that what we're doing is bringing in the amazing power of the community, that becomes threatening, but it also changes our jobs in a lot of different ways. Are you seeing kind of where I'm going with it? I'm not trying to settle this. I'm trying to be provocative and raise the idea. Anyone have any comments on this or thoughts? Okay.
I can just say, Susan, that many times I find that I hear organizations when talking about ROI and trying to calculate the worth of a volunteer's hour, they always say our organization has saved this and this money this year.
I know.
And I always say your organization did not save this money. Your organization got a donation of this money. It's a donation.
You did more than you could have with your money.
Exactly. It's a donation of people's time, of people's effort. It's not saving money.
But the other part of it is, the reason this is an important issue is that it's not just the financial value. A long time ago, I heard a wonderful economist whose name it is early in the morning. I'll come up with her name. I'll send you a name afterwards. She talked about her economy. She said, my fellow economists don't value trees until they're cut down into lumber. Then they have a dollar value, a money value, when they're lumber. But when they're still out there in the field in their trees, they don't have that kind of value. And she said, so what does that do when you start talking about the environment and wanting to make things good? And how do you put a value on the shade that the tree gives or whatever? Now, that's a simple analogy, but it's really true. We keep wanting to value volunteers along the lines of what would paid staff be like if they did it. And it's undercutting the point that if you are saying you're serving the community, then the community ought to be happy they're being served by you and ought to be supporting it. So it's a circular kind of thing. But I don't want to frustrate you, but I do say that the questions I have on this handout are ones you might want to spend some time in your organizations talking about it and dealing with it, because they're very important questions. And you might ask volunteers what they think they're doing there too. But the question, therefore, you start with, what is our vision, our definition, our goal, the benefits of having volunteers in the first place? Now we come to the next question, which is on this handout. What is the leader of volunteers all about? What purpose does your role fill for the organization? And I'm going to ask you that. I am going to stop and I'm going to ask you, tell me not what you do. In other words, that's why I said hint. This is not answered by a list of volunteer management tasks, meaning I'm not asking what you do. I know what you do. I teach you about what you do. You know the job, you develop job description, volunteer position descriptions, you recruit, you do. Those are tasks. Those are activities. I'm asking, what is the purpose? Where do you fit into your organization in terms of achieving their mission? What's your purpose of your role? I'm literally asking you that. Why are you there?
Because the breakfast.
I'll try with English.
Okay. Or say it in Hebrew and we will help translate.
I'll give it a try.
Okay.
I work in an NGO that handles young Israeli academics from an Ethiopian descent. And I don't know if you are aware of this fact, but the young Ethiopian academics in Israel have a huge problem becoming integrated into the employment sector.
Right.
And I head the volunteer program. I have about 1,500 volunteers.
What do you do on Thursdays? Sorry.
I don't even know if it's the end of my week or the beginning, on Thursdays. And if I have to try to define what's the purpose of my position, I go first to the vision of our NGO, which is to truly connect the Israelis that have lived here for many years with the young, or not necessarily young, but with the Ethiopian community. And the employment integration is just a way of doing it, a method, but not the real purpose. It's just a step on the way. And the way we do it is by inviting people from deep Israeli background to interact with the young Ethiopians. We hope that at that point something will start and will move maybe naturally or independently. So my job basically is to bring the right people, which means right background, right profile, whatever, and to connect them with the right people from within the Ethiopian community, and to try to see this vision come about, materialize.
And this is a wonderful, what is your name?
More. I swear it's my name. I know. I lived in the States for a few years. I already know the more or less and the whole. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. No, I was not going to say any of that. I heard it correctly. Okay. Yeah. I think your example is wonderful. It's a great example of something. Because, and you've done a wonderful job of describing what you do, because the truth is what I hear when you say that is, the second, if you note, the second question in that handout says, what value does your role bring to the organization that is different from the other employees? And it's not just we work with volunteers. The mission of your organization is something that is really integration and acceptance on an everyday level with other Israelis.
True.
If you didn't have a volunteer program, what you'd be having is a bunch of people whose job it is to get those people accepted, and you don't have you're bringing in the entire other side of the equation, which is you're saying we're intermediaries. We're trying to get the community around average, ordinary Israelis to interact with these people and then become beyond what we're managing, beyond that, really becoming potentially friends or whatever.
Exactly.
And in that mix, you can't say to somebody, okay, I'm going to pay you now to integrate with this Ethiopian.
Exactly.
It won't work. So you have a very conscious thing, but it's very important. If somebody started saying, so what's the dollar value or what's the shekel value of being a volunteer here? What does that, you can't, that's not value. It doesn't fit in ROI because it's an intangible that you're trying to get happening. And if in fact you tried to do it with money, you would be changing what you're trying to set up. That's a wonderful example. Anybody else want to try what the purpose of your role is for your organization? As I get another tissue.
Non-government organization. עמותה.
Somebody else that started? If you don't talk to me, I'm going to make you talk to each other first and then talk to me. Because I think this is really important. Why are you there? What is different about your role? What do you offer your organization? Why is the position existing?
I think it's really interesting that nobody's answering. I think that in itself.
That's why I asked the question. And you also see that, to me, we can't talk about what's the role of the volunteer manager in the 21st century if we can't answer it in general. What's the role of the volunteer manager?
אפשר גם בעברית, תרגישו בנוח.
אולי אני אנסה בעברית, כי למרות שאני יודע אנגלית, אבל אני רוצה להיות clear, okay? Even though I know English, I will do it in Hebrew maybe. I'm working for this, maybe I will do it in English, I don't know. No, I don't know if you will understand me or not, because my accent is something like
I can understand you very well.
Okay. I'm working for Ra'anana Municipal. It's a big city in not far away from Tel Aviv, very strong city. And even though we have employees for everything, kind of. You can ask me the question why we need volunteers in Ra'anana, because we don't have poor neighborhood, or we don't have very crime places, and we don't have new immigrants that come from Ethiopia or from Russia. So why we need volunteers? It's a good question. We need volunteers, I think, because it gives volume to the city. Besides the city has to take care of the residents in the city. And we have to collect the garbage, we have to give light, we have to give culture, and we have to give education. But I think every city needed for the duvdevan,
The cherry.
the cherry of the city. The city, they are strong, they need benefit. Why? I mean, we have to be different. We have to do something, it's behind what we need. And I think part of that we have around 2,500 volunteers in Ra'anana. It's because we want it will be on the site all the time. All the time, it's like, I mean, it has to be there to make the residents better than they are now.
Okay, wait a minute.
Do you understand me?
Aren't your volunteers also residents?
Yeah, they're residents.
Well, maybe you, just as, first of all, let me tell you, your English is excellent.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
so
My wife
don't
is American,
but
but
no
it's...
problem.
Okay. But
No,
I
I'm
don't-
sorry, I didn't mean to
okay.
interrupt you, but I wanted to be sure I understood it, because
Okay.
what you said is, we have so and so many volunteers, and then you went residents. I think that part of what your role is to recognize that the city has no meaning without its residents. There is no city without the residents. I mean, that's what creates a city. A lot of people reside there, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're talking about, as a matter of fact, I think all government should be taught, any government agency that brings in volunteers needs to recognize that it's those people who pay the salary of everybody in the place, because tax money pays for the paid workers, right?
Okay.
So you're dealing with, we're bringing in the stakeholders. We are allowing the citizens of this city to participate in their city.
Exactly. To be involved.
Okay? To be involved, but to not only be involved as helping. See, this is where it becomes really important. They're helping, yes, but the other thing that they're doing is by being engaged, they're making the quality of life in their own city better for everyone. It's almost self-help, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's helping others, but also it helps them because it makes your city better to live in for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you have, for example, a good example is, and it's a little example because it's not the most important thing in the world, but I'm pretty sure you have this in Israel too, where there are people who like to garden, who like to make things bloom or whatever, who will go put flowers along the side of a road in a certain area, or they'll plant something in a vacant area. Do you have that are done by volunteers?
No, we don't have it.
מדינות קהילתיות.
אין לנו את זה. We don't have it.
Community gardens.
Yeah, but we don't have it in our city. I mean, there is in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, but not in my city.
Okay, which means that your city employs gardeners, and anything that makes the city pretty is done by paid staff?
נכון. Right.
Yes?
But we have people that are walking the dogs from the kalbiya. You said kalbiya?
From the pound.
From the pound,
Right.
for example. So we are doing different
That's
things.
done by volunteers?
They are volunteers.
Oh, it's interesting. Okay, but what I'm getting at is, that's interesting you don't have it, because sometimes what happens is when citizens help to beautify an area, when they plant flowers or they get involved, their whole feeling about that area changes, because it doesn't matter whether a paid person plants a flower or a volunteer plants a flower. The flower gets planted properly, and that's what's important, not whether the hand that planted it was paid or unpaid. But the effect of a community, of a neighborhood, knowing that they put that stuff in, makes them feel a sense of ownership of it.
נכון. Right.
You see?
Yeah, I understand. I agree
Anyway,
with you.
I would say that your role is you are the citizen gatekeeper. You are the person who finds ways for citizens to express their belief in the community and in the quality of life in the community. That's a very different statement than I bring in volunteers. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I understand you. I mean, I can give you another example. It's a bad example, not a good example. When I start my job half a year ago, the general manager came to me and said, I need 80 volunteers. And I said,
Tomorrow.
Why do you
tomorrow.
need 80 volunteers? I want them to guard the kindergartens. So I said, they are not employees. I mean, it's not a job for volunteers. I mean, you want to save money and you ask me to bring volunteers to guard the kindergartens? I mean,
Right.
it's not the So I think part of my job now in the city is to educate the people what it's volunteers. I mean, It's not like you said in the beginning, it's not cheap employees. I mean, a lot of people come to me daily, from all the departments, say, do you have volunteer for me? Do you have volunteer for me? It's like maintenance, not maintenance, כוח אדם,
Human resource.
Human resource, okay, I will give you one. How do you need? 2? Okay, I will give you 2.
The answer is I have a few in the freezer. I'll defrost them for you by the morning.
Yeah, so part of my job, as I see that, it's to educate the kids and the adults in the city. We are talking about something different, about something spirit. I look at it as a spirit thing, it's not just volunteers to here or volunteers to there. So.
You're right. No, and I really like that. And we need to discuss a number of other things before the end of this session. But I'm spending this time on it because I wanted us to get past the silence, I really, really recommend that while you're at this event, is this a one-day event today or is it 2 days? One day? When you're going home tonight, I really hope you think about how do I express the work that I do? And do I take on the responsibility, as we were just discussing, of being that educator? Because it is part of what we have to do. If we don't speak up to educate people, if we just get angry, when somebody comes and says, I need a volunteer to do this, our reaction, we do get a little irritated because we think, what's wrong with you? Volunteers aren't supposed to guard a kindergarten. We get into that. But the truth is, first of all, give them credit for even knowing your department exists to come to you and ask you for it. let's look at the bright side, right? But it's an opportunity to educate. It's an opportunity to say, not no, but to say, look, the way you're describing this is not sensible for what we need to do with volunteers. If you want me to find a volunteer who knows something about security or about guarding, or somebody who had done something like this when they were in the military, we can bring in somebody to advise the department on how we might best do this. Or you might want to say, we'll have a few guards that we pay for, but how do we then engage, let's say, the parents of these kindergartners in what can they do to work around that, so that you can become a strategist, help them see that volunteers can help think through a problem. That's not the same as just utilizing them as go do there and stand at the door and guard it. And I think that's where it's important for us to fit in conceptually. Does anybody have anything else you want to share on this before we move on?
I think it's a very fine line between...
Yes.
And personally, I have to admit, I do this on a more intuitive level. If I now have to actually write down what is the difference between a paid employee and a volunteer, there are a few things I can think about, but it's not always that clear. That's right, you're correct. But what I'm saying is, yes, I'm glad you're making this clarification. You were right, it's not always that clear. And when it comes to government, I know you're with the NGO, but when it comes to government, it's the taxpayer, I'm serious, it's the taxpayer that paid for the government to be there in the first place. So when somebody says, I'm a taxpayer and I want to do that and I don't want you to spend money on this because I want to do this, it does create a different relationship because it's like you're not letting me spend my money the way I want to spend my money. But that becomes really philosophic and we need to be face-to-face for that one. I need to take the temperature of the room face-to-face. But what I'm getting at is, if you're in volunteer management for a while, you have to begin to trust your gut. And if you are feeling really uncomfortable about what somebody's asking you to do with volunteers, it's have the conversation. It's not our goal to just go, sure, anything you want, aye, sir, whatever you want. Any more than it is to simply say no. That's also wrong. No, and running away doesn't make any sense. I'm suggesting that this continuous dialogue, one of the things you might want to do is get the person to talk with you about what's in their mind. Sometimes they say something like, go get me guards for the kindergarten, and you don't necessarily really know what they're trying to get. Does that make sense? I'm looking for, what I'm saying is, and I am going to move on, is I believe our role is to question, is to be as supportive as we can of the goals of our organization and of what the paid staff needs to do, what the clients need, and that you're right, there are no if there were hard and fast rules, I'd put out a book
that listed everything volunteers do, and I'd say next to it, this is good, this is bad, this is good. I wish it was that easy. I'd love to give that advice. But
I'd love
we're
to get
the
it.
one. Pardon me?
I would love to get it.
Yeah. But I'm saying that I think we should be part of the dialogue. Why are we doing it? Another thing is, I think that's a wonderful role for volunteers to be experimenters. It's a legitimate thing to say, we're not sure we should go into this idea. We're not sure this will work. Can you find some volunteers knowing that they're going to do this for, let's say, 3 months and test the idea out? And then we'll all know if this works, if it's a good service, if people like it, then maybe we'll go find funding for it and we'll do it with paid people. That's legitimate, to involve volunteers as field tests, as experimenters, providing we explain that that's what we're doing. Some people would love that idea, to be in there to test whether something works. So there are a lot of different things. Okay, is there anything on this handout you would like me to explain or whatever? Because again, you will see I'm very Socratic, like Socrates in my teaching. I believe in good questions. So you'll see that a lot of my material is done in questions, because I believe there aren't necessarily perfect answers, but it's in the process of thinking about through the questions that you learn. Anything? Okay. Then what I'd now like to talk about is I'd like to go to the handout that says Applied Futurism. It's the one with the spaceship. Believe it or not, I did not draw that spaceship. It's clip art. Anyway, I wanted you to point out, I love this first line that's here. It's something that futurists talk about. If you talk to people who are, whose job it is to predict the future, I don't mean fortune tellers, but I mean people who are trying to figure out where will technology be in 20 years, or what's the future of electricity versus solar power, whatever. They will always speak in the plural about future. They'll say futures. And the reason is that on any given day, we don't know what the next day will bring. And so there are many potential things. And so they talk about 3 kinds of possible futures: possible, probable, and preferable. Possible futures are everything that might actually happen, that could happen within the laws of physics and the universe. But that's everything from destruction to utopia, everything that if we project ahead, all the really terrible things that could happen, all the great things that could happen, whatever. Within that range, there's a much narrower range of probable futures, meaning we can't necessarily predict certain things that will happen. We can't predict a tsunami would suddenly create all this tidal wave and stuff, and earthquake and tsunami in Japan would have a ripple effect that, I don't know if you've bought a computer lately, but right now it's really, really hard to get the hard drives and all for a computer, because so much of it was being manufactured in that area of Japan right now. Nobody could have predicted that was going to happen, but it was within the probabilities of what was going to happen. All of us in volunteerism, however, are really engaged in what is called the preferable future. Which of all of these choices do we want to see happen? Now understand that preferable future is in the eye of the beholder. Every time there is an election, part of the electorate has one preferable future and the other part of the electorate has a different preferable future, okay? But volunteering is all about preferable futures. People spend their time and effort on what they want to see succeed. Now, I'm making this point because I believe that one of the important things about volunteering is it empowers people when times are bad. If right now one of the things happening in the world is this terrible economy and the potential collapse of the euro in Europe, the problems we're having here in the United States, which are quite serious financially, all of those things are happening, and it's global at the moment. And most individuals feel incredibly powerless in view of that. We're all seeing ourselves as victims of it. We didn't control the banks. We didn't make bad loans. All of that stuff. The question, therefore, becomes for the volunteer manager is what's going on in the world outside that has an impact either on how we are going to be able to recruit new volunteers or in what's going on with volunteers we have. And I think that, again, if we only see ourselves in a reactive stage, if we only react to something, that's fine. Sometimes we can't predict something and we need to react to it. But I'm talking about consciously saying, what are the people what are our clients dealing with? What are our current volunteers dealing with? And how do we adapt to that? So, for example, right now in the United States, I'm doing a lot of talking with people about, do you even know how many of the volunteers you currently have either lost their paying jobs or have a spouse or somebody else in the family that lost their paying jobs, and that they're struggling in ways they did not struggle before? And what does that mean to you in terms of retaining them as volunteers or helping them through their volunteer work? The other side of that is, if people lost their jobs, can we engage them in volunteering during this period of transition, because it's good for self-esteem, it's good to learn new skills, it's good for having something on your resume in between this time? Is that a viable thing for us to do? And I think that conversation only can happen if we make sure that we're aware of the trends and issues that are affecting everyone in the community, and then asking how it affects us. So my question to you is, what do you see right now in Israel that is a current issue or current trends that you feel as a volunteer manager, well, let's not say that you think is really affecting everybody or a great number of people who currently volunteer for you, or perhaps who might volunteer for you? What are some, tell me about a number of those things, and let's see where that leads us.
נחזור על השאלה? היא בעצם שואלת אילו טרנדים או אילו דברים שמתרחשים כרגע ברמה האקטואלית כרגע בישראל משפיעים על המתנדבים הנוכחיים שלכם או על מתנדבים פוטנציאליים, ובעצם בהשלכה על התפקיד שלכם כמנהלי התנדבות. גורמת לאנשים מה? They're talking about the social protest that was, I don't know how well informed it was in your media. We had very strong social protest last summer here in Israel. And the effect this has on the fact that people feel today that they want to contribute more based on that.
So in other words, they began to feel that the more engaged they are, the more they can create the kind of world they want to have in Israel.
More a feeling of stronger solidarity.
Okay. All right. So my question to you, and this is only a...
1 second, Susan. Somebody here,
sure.
She's saying that in her organization there was the opposite process. She's the volunteer coordinator at the one of the big health services. The biggest, yes. Biggest health, yes. Biggest health service in Israel.
המתמחים, שביתת המתמחים, בעצם גרמה לזה שהעובדים פתאום אמרו, מה, אנחנו יוצאים להתנדב למען הקהילה האתיופית, או לקידום נושאים חברתיים אחרים, ולא מתעסקים בעצם ברופאים שלנו, ובעצם
Okay. So one of the biggest social protests was the protest of the medical interns that protested about their terms of employment.
Okay.
Okay. And what she's saying is that the employees of this health service, who usually would go out and volunteer in the community, were saying, how come you're expecting us to go out and volunteer with different populations when we have such problems of our own, that we need to deal with that before we start volunteering out in the community.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a very specific situation, and I don't know enough of the dynamics of it to comment on, but I think what these ideas have just come out does tend to reinforce, first of all, that when there's a time of protest, the worst thing you can do is basically act like it's not happening out there. Okay? Even if your organization is not directly engaged in what pro or con anything that's being protested, the volunteers that you're dealing with are themselves asking themselves. I mean, for example, I'm taking both sides of this. I'll come back to the intern things in a minute. It's like if somebody is getting really active in what's happening with the protests, are they going to feel that they should actually stop volunteering with you so that they can go and be more active, be on the street, be protesting, carrying signs, or whatever it is? Do they have a family member who's deeply involved in that? But the other question is, where does your organization stand on some of these issues? Sometimes it's going to be it's something like, that's fine, you can be involved, we have to be neutral, you're not allowed to wear any buttons in here, or whatever. Sometimes you have to make it yourself a neutral place that people can come and talk about things. But other times you might want to engage in it. The point is being aware that people's volunteering is not in a vacuum. Now, the issue with the interns is slightly different. I think the question there is, because they may have been right, they may have been wrong, I don't know. But since part of what they're talking about in that protest was doing volunteer work, being asked to do something out in the community, I would hope that your volunteer office was involved in some of those discussions. And I have a feeling you weren't. The person who said that, were you part of how that was handled? The person who just gave the example of the medical interns protesting that they didn't want to go out and do service, was the volunteer office at all involved in those negotiations?
האם הייתם מעורבים באיזושהי צורה בתהליכי המשא ומתן שם? No.
No. Why am I not surprised?
No, but that's also...
It's a really, in other words, it was, when you really think about it, these were two groups of people having a discussion about something that your office, the volunteer office, ought to have been seen as knowing something about. And yet you weren't a part of it. So to me, the other question is, what does that mean from the point of view, how did the volunteers feel about that protest going on? Did they agree with it? Did they not agree with it? I don't know what I think. I need to know the details. But it has to do with, if you didn't go to your executive, and maybe a thought would have been to say, look, let's talk this through, even if they don't let you discuss it with the protesters or with the union or whatever. Going to your superiors and saying, I'd be more than happy to talk this through with you, or to do some discussion of what is our position on why we're asking them to do this. It's kind of saying, utilize me. I'm your in-house expert on volunteering, and this is a debate about volunteering. So it was an opportunity to do some education, and yet you also learned something because the administrator didn't call you in to say, how do I handle this? Anyway, again, I want to keep moving on, but I would say to you that I really believe that something that you might want to do in your organizations is perhaps once a year you convene a think tank, I call it, or a day of thinking about what's going on out there. And it is interesting because as a volunteer coordinator, one of the things you could do, you could offer to organize this for your whole organization and have paid staff participate as well as volunteers, potentially even clients, depending on the kind of service that you give. And you might even bring in perhaps someone from the newspaper, perhaps someone from maybe a politician, maybe somebody from a bank. I mean, I don't know. But what you get together about for a day is to say, what are the trends right now in our community that we ought to be aware of as we move forward in our services? Because here's an interesting thing to think about. The volunteer department potentially is the most flexible department in the whole organization, Because if you should be able to respond to a new situation faster and more effectively in the beginning than the paid staff can do. Because you can go out tomorrow and get somebody with expertise to tell you something and help you in a way that, in this case, in a way that the paid staff, there's not a position available yet. There's no money yet for a staff member to do that or whatever. So one of the roles, if you can position the volunteer office to be the group thinking about trends, the group recommending what trends might mean, asking volunteers what they see as they go out and work for you. What did they see that perhaps the staff isn't seeing because the staff is doing other kinds of roles?